Welcome back. We're visiting with Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, a longtime um, ambassador and diplomatic figure in his native state of Israel, now the author of the Ettinger Report and a great resource to this program. We're always delighted to have a chance to catch up with him. Mr. Ambassador, let me just ask you, as the region is trying to make sense of what the Biden team is up to. Is it fair to say that the president has seemingly decided, and his subordinates obviously, to embrace America's enemies at the expense of its friends? And if that's correct, is it likely that our friends are going to be less likely to be friendly, especially in the course of his visits there, and our enemies be more emboldened? The consensus being presumably that if it's better to be an enemy of the United States than an ally, you're likely to have more enemies. No.
Well, America's friends, whether you're talking about the Sunni Arab countries of the Persian Gulf or Egypt or Jordan or Israel, America's friends want a deterring America. They don't want an America which appeases and retreats and concedes and shares common agenda with the United Nation. America's friends want America, which understands that retaining the independence of unilateral national security action is the guiding line. At this stage, ever since Secretary Blinken assumed power, it's not the independent unilateral America, it's the highly dependent multilateral cosmopolitan America which seeks common denominator with the UN and with the European. The only way to achieve common denominator with the UN and the Europeans is to undermine America's own interests. And America's
Yes.
own interests are consistent with the minimization of global insanity. At this
Mm.
stage, with the decline or erosion of America's posture of deterrence, this is a cause for jubilation in Russia and China and Tehran and North Korea and Venezuela and Cuba and the headquarters of Taliban and Al Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, and certainly a cause for deep concern among America's traditional friends in the Middle East. I would even suggest that a major reason behind the recent dramatic enhancement of military and commercial cooperation between Israel and Saudi Arabia, Israel, United Emirates, and Bahrain and Oman has to do with the realization of the Sunni Arab regimes that they are not very certain about the credibility of the US. And at the same time, they consider Israel to be highly credible in face of mutual threat, which is the regime of the Ayatollahs of Iran.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that regime. The Prime Minister of Israel has, as I understand it, now reaffirmed his concern that Iran is very close to having the nuclear capabilities that it's long sought. This would suggest that the time for further temporizing and hoping against hope that that's not going to happen, or that a deal of some kind is going to spare us a nuclear armed Iran, is essentially at an end. Do you see it that way, Ambassador Edinger? And if so, do you anticipate that we're really at the point where um, the only option left now is military action to prevent the Iranians from not only gaining access to these weapons, but perhaps using them as well.
Well, the challenge for the U.S. policymakers, in my mind, is to be reconnected with Middle East reality, with Iranian reality. If you go back to 1978-79, when President Carter courted Ayatollah Khomeini and was basically taken for a long ride by Ayatollah Khomeini,
Mm.
who convinced President Carter and his own team that the Ayatollahs are not going to be concerned about external matters, only domestic matters. And President Carter was convinced, as he put it in his own words, that Ayatollah Khomeini was going to be preoccupied with tractors, not with
Mhm.
tanks. As a result, it was the US that paved the road for the Ayatollah's takeover of Iran. It was the US
Yes.
that basically prevented a military opposition to the Ayatollahs. And as expected, terrorists bite the hand that feeds them. And the next thing that we saw was the Ayatollahs taking over the American embassy, holding more than 50 Americans hostage for 444 days. The same policy also underlined the attitude of President Obama and Vice President Biden when they came up with the 2015 JCPOA under the assumption that the Ayatollahs can be enticed into peaceful
Mhm.
coexistence, into democracy, into the departure from their fanatic religious goal of bringing the West and the Sunni Arabs to submission. And as a result, President Obama and Vice President Biden, they showered the Iranians with some $150 billion, most of which has been invested in bolstering the anti-American machine of terrorism and subversion and civil wars and drug trafficking and collaboration
Mhm.
with every single anti-American regime in Latin America, the major drug cartels of Mexico, Colombia, and Bolivia, and every single Latin American terror organization. At this stage, it's time for the administration to examine their track record, which has been uh, uh, totally shattered by the track
Mhm.
record of the Ayatollahs from 79 until today, and ask themselves whether it is advisable from the American point of view to persist with the diplomatic option rather than resort to the option of regime change and military. When you observe the track record of the Ayatollahs, you cannot but conclude that you are not a good that they are not good faith negotiators, that the Ayatollahs, are rogue regime, and as such, they cannot be approached as if they are
They
good
cannot be.
faith. In fact, they are ill faith negotiators, and it's time to revive the option of military and regime change, which, by the way, could bolster America's posture of deterrence.
We have to leave it at that, Mr. Ambassador. Very important message and very timely, needless to say. We'll be consulting with you further as this trip approaches. In the meantime, thank you very much for your efforts today. We
Thank you.
appreciate them greatly. Next up, Elaine Donnelly on the woke military. Is this any time to be doing that kind of harm to the only armed forces we have? That and more straight ahead.